And we're live on Book Chat Live
Good
with
evening.
the amazing Mark Hayden, who has brought a character along with him as well in the background, haven't you?
Yeah. This is Moley.
Hello, Moley. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, he likes to see what's going on, and he's a bit of a diva, but he does fulfil an important function at Hayden Towers. Just ask yourself this, Tim: who is protecting your house from invertebrate undead?
Yeah,
Who
true.
is stopping the zombie slugs and the vampire worms from getting in? That's what Moley does.
Yeah.
He charges a very high price, but that's his role.
So this was a problem in the past, then, presumably. Anyway, we're getting a little bit off track because normally on this show, rather than talking about invertebrate and undead, we talk about people's favourite books, and we may also see some of your books amongst these many books we talk about. So, shall we get started? Are you in the? Is Moley approving of us getting started?
He is. He's given us the his Molish sign. Yes.
Okay, here we go. Lord of Light by Robert Zelazny.
Roger Zelazny.
Zelazny.
Yes. American author. This is my copy, and you'll see from the inscription that I bought it in 1975.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That's a while. I was born in 73, so that's a while back.
Yeah, I was what, I would have been about 13 then.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's Lord of Light, Zelazny, American author, and he's had a huge impact on my writing. I chose this book rather than the Chronicles of Amber, Nine Princes in Amber, The Guns of Avalon. They're very well known, and there's a direct ancestral line between the Amber series and the books that I write. I chose Lord of Light because it was the first one of his books that I read, and it had a huge impact on me as a youngster. It's science fantasy, a group of, again, this is written just before the first moon landing. So the shape of the future was starting to unfold, and it's about a spaceship at some unspecified point in the future. We never know how or why. It sets out, it goes, it colonizes a planet, and it's quite clear that the passengers, the colonists, are from an Indian, what we would now describe as an Indian heritage, and it's crude, and the leaders of the colony ship are people with telekinetic, telepathic mental powers, and so are the inhabitants of the planet they land on.
Yeah,
that's in the past. The book is set at a time when those people with those powers have set them up as and started calling themselves as the Hindu gods. Which is hence you have Brahma and Vishnu and Yama, the Lord of Death, which is fine, but they also control they actually have reincarnation with lab-grown bodies. So the colonists there, they sort of got them over a barrel because they control that particular thing. Who controls reincarnation controls the planet, and it's about one of the original people, one of the original first, who decides he's not entirely keen on that, and he leads what amounts to a rebellion. But it's the way the entire world is conjured. It's the way that I have no idea whether Zelazny ever went to India, but he certainly gives you a flavour of that. And I've been fascinated by it. Not fascinated. I've been looking into India ever since. Luckily enough, last year I got to go. I brought Ganesh home to watch over my writing, and one of the characters in my books does come from a British Asian heritage, so that's in there as well. But Lord of Light, it's one of those books, one of the first books where the author invents religious texts, puts them at the heading of the chapters, as if the characters in this book are not just the Hindu gods, but have their own stories. And it's the way I didn't pick this up at the time. I was still only a teenager, early teenager. but the way the tone switches between what I would call the God register, where the characters are described as if they are heroes in some great saga, but also they talk about everyday things, and they still talk amongst themselves as if they're still on that ship. So that's I've come back to that book over the last 50 years.
Yeah.
Since I read it, and I believe it stands the test of time. I think that's a book that somebody who's interested in science fantasy could go out and get and enjoy today as much as I enjoyed it then.
Yeah, it sounds like the sort. The funny thing is, like, I've written fantasy and I've written sci-fi, but I always kind of struggled a lot of the time with reading sci-fi, especially in fantasy, because a lot of them tend to be very long-winded, and like I wasn't necessarily a great reader as a child. But this sounds like the sort of book I might like. So. Absolutely,
it is very short. I mean, it's there's a small paperback. It's only 250 pages. When that was at a time when big books weren't really being written. The only big book around was The Lord of the Rings, and that was split into 3 bits. Before what's her name? Sword of Shannara. That was one of the first really big fat fantasy books to take on the bookshelves. Round about the time you were going to nursery, probably.
Probably, yeah. So, okay, well, should we get off the very old book and get on to another very old book? Right, here we go. Tinker Tailor Soldier's Spy by John le Carré. So
yeah, now that's still a book that most people will have heard of. Have you read it?
I've heard of it. I think I've seen a TV adaptation of it. I haven't actually read it. So you're going to show me up. I'm not sure if I, of these books, I've read 2 of them, I think. So that makes me a horrible illiterate.
Well, no, they're a very personal choice. And it's probably worth saying now, before we get too further on, only one of I chose 5 books by other people. Only one of them is written by a woman, P.D.James, and reflects sort of books that have stuck with me. It doesn't reflect my reading now. And of course, in 1974, 75, there weren't any science fiction books written by women, or if there were, they certainly weren't on the bookshelves of my local bookstore. And it's, thankfully, things have changed for the better. And I did think about an author called Julian May, who is actually Julia. I think she stuck an N on because women weren't getting published at the time. And again, that had a big impact on me. But I've chosen Tinker Tailor Soldier's Spy. In the edition, this edition is, of course, the one that was made to go with the film that Gary Oldman starred in. But I'd actually came to that book after I'd seen the TV series, which starred Sir Alec Guinness. It was made in 1979. You can still definitely see it on Amazon Prime. You might be able to see it on BBC iPlayer. I can thoroughly recommend it. One of the greatest pieces of television ever made. But the reason it's so good is mostly because of this book. Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy is what is in some ways the ultimate spy novel. It's set in about 1973, and there's been an agent turns up from Hong Kong, or in the TV version from Portugal, because it's a lot cheaper to film it in Portugal. That's the only thing they did change. An agent turns up from Hong Kong and says, I've got conclusive proof that within the Circus, within MI6, is a mole. Believe it or not. Absolutely. And they go and get George Smiley, a retired spook, to go and look into it. And this is the moment where the civil servant who oversees these things has realized that that there's something wrong. So the civil servant says, so I can tell him you'll do it, can I? You'll take the job, clean the stables, go backwards, go forwards, do whatever is necessary. It's your generation, after all. It's your legacy. And the book was published in about 73, 76, something like that. And and set then, but it's very much a book where you think actually it's set in the, should have been set in the 50s. If you think about the mid-70s, the country then was being run by my parents' generation, which was the generation that had fought the Second World War, and then gone on to, in some cases, gone on to be spies. In my father's case, he'd gone on to be a primary school teacher after, after his war service. And it's about how George Smiley goes back to the circus and looks into what had been going on, because it's, when you watch the TV series, you see it's so wonderfully evocative, because you've got all of this, what they call tradecraft, where people are setting door wedges to see whether they've been disturbed. The dead letter drops. They've got all the ways of not being seen as they go around looking over their shoulders. And he goes back and to this incident, which is at the heart of it, where somebody's sitting in a dingy office up in Cambridge Circus and waiting for things to come over the radio. The world of spycraft wasn't like that in the 1970s. There's literally no mention of GCHQ. And from about the mid-50s onwards, most of intelligence actually starts and originates with GCHQ. Not with people passing dirty packets around inside, smoke-filled rooms in the Czech Republic.
But that's probably not as exciting as the spy trope, is it? I mean, that's something.
No. And human intelligence is always a crucial part. But I chose it again because of the story. All of the books I've chosen. This is Lord of Light is a book about gods as men, absolute power corrupting in a very, very deep way. Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy is about trust. It's about legacy. It's about how you create a world and get the reader to believe in the world and get as invested in that world and its values as George Smiley is. And as we follow, we never really get inside George Smiley's head. It's we don't get to really know what he thinks or feels. You can sort of figure it out. That's why Sir Alec Guinness's portrayal of him in the TV series was so masterful. It's that the pudgy character who was always cleaning his glasses, whose clothes don't quite fit properly, whose wife is constantly having affairs, and who's left out of things. But he's the one who has to go and try and find the mole. It's not a spoiler to say he does. Well, it might be different if he doesn't find the mole, but I suspect it would be not great. So it sounds like you're similar to me in that you appreciate the story element more in a way than necessarily the descriptive and the kind of, because there are people who recommend books just for the power of the description a bit, but sometimes I've read some of those books and you're like, oh, there's nothing much actually happens in it. So quite. I mean, I've written about 20 books now, and I've never described myself as anything but a storyteller. If I can make people believe that they are down in the tunnels under London, or they're in a enchanted glade in Lancashire, then so much the better. But I don't think they'll believe that if I'm not telling a story that where they want to know what happens.
I mean, I think there is a minimum level of just writing ability needed to get that suspension of disbelief, isn't there? Okay, shall we go on to the next book by a very esteemed author? So excitement to look for. The 13th Witch by Mark Hayden. Who's this Mark Hayden guy?
Who is this Mark Hayden guy?
It's him.
That's him there, And I'm showing you this not just because I want to show off my book, but so you get an appreciation of just how much a difference a cover can make to a series. And when we do the other one, we'll see the most recent one. But I'm so grateful to the awesome Rachel Lawston, who I got to design the covers for The King's Watch. And you'll notice that there's no naked ladies, there's no dragons. It's a book where I aimed at basically people sort of my age, younger and slightly younger, slightly older. I certainly wasn't going to try and appeal to a teenage or a 20-something audience. And it wasn't the first book I wrote, but it's the first book in the King's Watch series.
Okay.
And I was very much looking to create a fantasy universe, and I chose to do one where it's an urban fantasy universe which coexists with the mundane one. And mundane is the word I use to describe the non-magical universe. And again, I'm not going to pretend for a moment that this was an original idea. It takes somebody who has no magic and has grown up without magic, and who suddenly one night he's been in some scrapes, and he comes back to his family home, and there's a well in the back garden, and he's been told to go to the well in a message, and he goes there, and Odin appears and says, "I've got a job for you if you fancy taking it."
Yeah.
And he's at a point in his life, he's 37. He's been invalided out of the RAF because his leg was shattered. And he's been involved in some serious goings on, and he's looking for something to try and do something different. He doesn't actually believe in magic at this point. He thinks that Odin is some sort of hologram or projection. And then all of a sudden, a part of his brain is opened up, and he can see things and do things which draw him into the world of magic. And he's told to go to Merlin's tower in the Tower of London, where he'll be offered a job. And that's what he does. And he discovers that he has possibly the minimum amount of magical gift that is possible to technically be called a mage.
Yeah.
And then he's told he can't join the King's Watch, who've been protecting us against the world of magic since the early 1600s. He can't join the King's Watch until he's got himself his badge of office. And the only way he can get his badge of office is to go and visit the dwarf that lives under the Bank of England.
Oh.
Because where else would you live if you were a dwarf?
Well, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, sort of seeking large gold adjacent hall. But to get to the dwarf that lives under the Bank of England, whose name is Hledjolf, by the way,
okay,
he has to get through the tunnels, and the tunnels protected by a giant mole.
Oh, who is that the person behind you?
yeah, inspired by Mowgli.
Yeah,
it's described as being the size of a bull.
Okay.
Yeah, and when Conrad the hero meets Mowgli, and it's the first-person story, I've tried to make the world he goes into, apart from the existence of a force called Lux magic, I've tried to make it stick as closely to the other laws of physics as possible.
Yeah.
So if you've got a mole that's the size of a bull, just think what his breath's going to smell like if he exists on a diet of giant worms.
Yeah.
And Lux I've described it later on as the books unfold as a metaforce, as in Lux allows you to affect other forces. So he meets a sidekick in the first book, Vicky, and Vicky shows him that you can use Lux to turn water into hydrogen and oxygen and then reignite it, or you can use it to Lux to raise the temperature of something or lower the temperature of something or do other things. As this book goes on, this book is called The 13th Witch because in order to join the King's Watch, he has to have his badge of office.
Yeah.
Having got past the giant mole, he gets to the dwarf. The dwarf says, "I'll make you a badge of office for a fee." Okay, how much? Do I need to mortgage my house? Oh no, you have to pay me in troy ounces of Lux. Okay. And how am I going to get some of this magical currency? I need you to go and try and find a witch for one of my clients. She's disappeared. And so off he goes in search of the 13th witch, who has gone AWOL from a coven in Lancashire. And they're very worried about her, quite rightly worried about her too. So he goes off round the country looking for, recruits a few people to help him. And of course, he's got no magic.
Yeah.
So first of all, he recruits somebody who does have some magic, and then he has to try and find a way to get past people who are trying to kill him, which they seem to do on a regular basis.
So presumably you don't really want to say too much more because you'll give the whole plot of the book away. But it does sound like an interesting. It's interesting with these fantasy books, like you're on a line to something, and then something happens, and you need another thing, and another thing, and another thing. It's quite a popular fantasy plot structure, I mean.
Yes, it's a well trodden path.
Yeah.
But I mean, the way I've tried to make mine different is by the character, and I've tried to, as I said, I tried to root the magic firmly in things that you can see would happen. You know, for example, there's no teleportation or things like that. And when we do meet the non-human characters, including Moley, there's a magical reason for them. You know, the dwarf Cledjolf and the other dwarfs that crop up, they have a part silicon metabolism, which is not, I'm not the first science fiction author to come up with that, but it's there and it's part of who they are. I've tried to make all the creatures of light, all the non-humans, as honest and true to themselves and as true to their biology as possible. So if you're a dwarf that needs magic to stay alive, and you will turn to stone if you go out into the sunshine, you're going to behave slightly differently.
Yes. Well, that's good. It's nice. I like consistent books where they have some sort of, rather than just magic comes in as the thing that saves everybody in the last chapter because it can do. You never say what magic can do, and it's like, oh yeah, it's like, what do they call it? There's a name for that when it's like something comes in from left field and sorts out all the problems.
There's a couple of names for that. Yeah. It was in theatre. It used to be the Deus Ex Machina.
Oh yeah. That's the term I was looking for. Yeah. Okay, and this is part of a series, isn't it? Are we going to talk about some of the other books in this series later on, by any chance, or are they different books?
No. There are currently 12 books and 7 novellas in the series.
Okay. And we're not going to talk about all 12, so...
No, we're going to talk about number 1 and number 12.
Yeah.
Which I thought was reasonable.
Oh, yeah, no. Yeah, I've always been like, you can have up to half the books of your own in this show. So let's go on to the next one, not next book, not necessarily by you. The Private Patient by P.D.James. So why did you pick this book?
There we go. This was written in 2008 when Baroness Phyllis James, to give her...
I wonder what P.D.James stood for. I mean, Phyllis.
Yeah. Baroness Phyllis James was 88, and it's the last I wouldn't recommend starting with this, but it's the only one I had a physical copy of.
Okay.
Yeah. She wrote a series of books featuring Commander Adam Dalgleish. They've just refilmed them. They were done in the 80s with Roy Marsden as Adam Dalgleish, and they've just been done again. They started doing them again with Bertie Carvel, I think his name is. Yeah, actor. Yeah. And the first one is Cover Her Face. And you can easily find them out. I chose P.D.James. I could have also chosen Elizabeth George, very similar crime writer, because P.D.James was the first crime writer I really got into. Before then, I'd been interested in science fiction and adventure to a certain extent. But when I started properly getting into crime fiction, she was the first one I really got into, and the first author I realized who was showing me how to handle a long story with multiple different viewpoints in it. And she's an absolute, I mean, yes, I could have picked Jane Austen because she does that well enough, but I wanted to pick something a little bit more closely related to the genres I write in. And she's an absolute master at it. Because occasionally, when you're reading about 2/3 of the way through the book, you've seen most of the time you're looking through Adam Dalglish's eyes, and also Kate Miskin, his right-hand woman, and seeing how the investigation and what they're thinking. But they also then cut, not when they're being talked to by the police, they cut to the other characters interacting off stage. And you can, if you follow it really closely, she never lets you inside the head of the murderer. But the way she handles those multiple viewpoints, the way that she started writing in the 60s when Agatha Christie was and Dorothy Sayers, to a certain extent Patricia Highsmith, were the only women who'd written crime novels before her. And she took it, she wanted something which focused on the detectives, but also more focused on how the victim, not how the victim was killed, although obviously there's a whodunit element, but how the victim came to be killed, how the killer came to do that. And when I've been talking about how to write crime stories and how to do that sort of thing, I say it's a bit like one of Newton's laws of motion. A body in motion will carry on in motion until a force is applied to it. And I've always said that when you're looking at fictional murder, figuring out what the force is that's been applied to the murderers. The murderer is going along, they think their life is going on a certain way. A force is applied to it which knocks them off course and propels them to do something like kill someone. And most of that character-based crime drama, Elizabeth George, American writer, who's wrote the Inspector Linley novels, took over from P.D.James at creating those complex characters in complex settings and really evoking. So you don't just know the people, you know the world they live in, and why somebody needed to be murdered in that book for them to feel that that their life could carry on as it was before.
Yeah, I'm glad you recommended P.D.James, because the others, Elizabeth George, has been recommended before, I think, not P.D.James. Right. So I think people have gone into the more recent books, really. Maybe
Deborah Crombie, she's another American writer who is very similar.
I'm not sure she's been mentioned, but I can't. I always go through the list, and it's like, surprisingly, none of your books have been mentioned before, which is interesting. The authors obviously have. John le Carré has been mentioned, but not for Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. I think people sometimes shy away from the obvious books, so to speak. But the obvious books are often. So with this particular one, you say, is this part of a series, and it's like towards the end? Then
it's the last one she wrote. It's the last, which is why I've hung on to the physical copy. I've got rid of the physical copies of all. I mean, as you can see, I've got a fair-sized library behind me. Most genre fiction I've donated to charity shops over the years, but no, I kept one P.D.James. As I said, she was 88 when she wrote it, and it was the last Adam Dalglish book, and there's about 20 of them, something like that. They're all very good. Some of them, maybe some of them are only good, some of them are superb. When she'd finished that, she said, I'm not entirely sure I can do another Adam Dalglish book to the same standard. So 4 years later, she published, just before she passed away, she published Death Comes to Pemberley, which which is they made somebody made a TV adaptation of that, which is very good. And it tries to imagine what the Bennett Darcy household was like after they got married. and has a murder mystery in it as well.
Yeah, well, obviously.
Yeah.
I was just trying to establish if anybody did want to buy this book, is there a previous book they need to have read before this, or is it just, are they all independent, the P.D.James?
Yeah, they're all still in print.
Yeah.
The first one is Cover Her Face.
Yeah.
And perhaps, on hindsight, perhaps I should have suggested that you put that on there rather than the Private Patient, which is the last one. And the Private Patient is also slightly atypical in that I put a bookmark in there so you can see where I am. And unusually, that side there, which is the first part, is before the murder.
Oh.
Yeah. Which is the only book she does that. We have 104 pages where we see the murderer, we see the victim starting off on the journey, which leads her to have, she's got a really noticeable facial scar. And she's become a successful investigative journalist. And she says, right, I've come to the point in my life where I want to go and have plastic surgery and have this removed. So she goes to have plastic surgery. The operation is a great success, and then someone kills her.
Yeah.
Which is not a spoiler because that's, it's on the back of the book.
Yeah. Okay, before we get into spoiling the book too much more, should we go on to the next one? Which is by this tremendously great modern author. So, A Piece of Blue Sky by Mark Hayden.
Oh, did I choose that one next? Oh,
yes.
right. I did, right.
I think you did, unless I screwed the order up, in which case we're running on this. So,
it's just a pair of moles to look after. Those are my books there, guarded by moles.
Is there a book theft issue in your house?
Well, no, it's to stop the, it's to stop the bookworms getting at them.
Yeah.
Absolutely. This cover was not designed by Rachel Lawston, which is why it's not as good. And it's from the Operation Jigsaw trilogy.
Ooh.
Yes. A Piece of Blue Sky, Green for Danger, and In the Red Corner.
Yeah.
And I called it the Operation Jigsaw trilogy because at the very start of the book, the detective involved in it is given a piece of blue sky. And you imagine trying to start a jigsaw and you've got a huge jigsaw, and you're given one piece of blue sky. And he has to try and then piece the rest of the jigsaw together. Yeah. And it starts with the first, again, it's one of those things. The first line of my books often comes to me, the first line of a series will come to me a long time before I write it. And when I was thinking of becoming an author, I published this book in 2014. Sorry. Yeah. So this is 10 years old now. And the first line of the book is, "This is the end for me." And the first line of, before I go back to that, the first line of the 13th, which came to me years before I wrote the book, it's, "Did you know the gods can use mobile phones?" Well, they can.
Yeah.
Anyway, the Piece of Blue Sky, it actually starts with the hero of this book a long time before he's a hero. This is when he's still serving in the RAF.
Oh, okay.
And he's in Afghanistan, and he flies helicopters. He flies Chinook helicopters. He's a squadron leader. He flies helicopters, and he's been recruited by a group of people who are siphoning off. It's not easy. It's not too difficult to prove that this, but particularly the Americans, the British as well, were literally handing over lorry loads of dollar bills to people who would fight the Taliban. And try and stabilize the country. And Conrad's bosses, they don't call it Jigsaw, they call it Operation Rainbow. Conrad's bosses in Operation Rainbow have recruited him to help siphon off some of this money and get it out of Afghanistan. And the book starts when something goes wrong. And that's what leads to Conrad having most of his leg blown off. And at the same time, there's three main people that we follow in the book. Somebody gets killed in the first chapter, a sergeant called Vinnie Jensen, and his girlfriend is in military intelligence, Kate Lonsdale. And in London, this tiny piece of blue sky is picked up by a detective called Tom Morton in Economic Crimes. And over the three books, each with their own purpose, Kate's trying to find out what happened to Vinnie. Tom Morton trying to find out what's going on. If you can just about see in the cover that it's got a £20 note.
Oh,
there. Yeah. Tom Morton comes across a den of money, a den of counterfeiters. This is before plastic banknotes as well. So, so Tom Morton's looking for his counterfeit money printers. Kate Lonsdale's trying to figure out what's going on. And Conrad Clark is being employed by the people who run Operation Jigsaw to try and stop them.
Yeah.
So he's a bit of an anti-hero, and it's a thriller. There is violence. There's a lot more violence in it than there is in my urban fantasy books, and people are a lot more ruthless. And it all finishes up on a beach in Morecambe Bay, where there's a big showdown. And I do quite well with the King's Watch books. I'm lucky enough to have built up a steady following of readers, but I don't push the Operation Jigsaw trilogy to them. I say it's there.
Yeah.
Once you get about halfway through the King's Watch, if you want to go and find out why Conrad is like he is, then go and read Operation Jigsaw.
Which order did you write the series then? Was it?
I wrote the Operation Jigsaw trilogy first.
Oh, okay.
Those three books, and at the end of it, I said, right, I didn't want to write any more thrillers, so I took the detective character Tom Morton, and I wrote two crime novels, which are very similar to P.D.James.
Okay.
And very much in keeping with early noughties crime styles. There we have a silhouette figure, Serpent in Paradise, and Tom Morton goes from sort of being involved in things where someone tries to blow up his car to a more traditional character-based detective drama set in Cheshire.
Oh, okay.
Where it's set in the gated community of footballers' wives and footballers. Literally there, and somebody's connected to them is murdered, and he comes in and he's part of the investigation. And I wrote the Operation Jigsaw trilogy. I wrote two Tom Morton novels, and I could probably count the number of people who read them that weren't related to me or who worked for my wife on the fingers of two hands.
And then you wrote the
and then I started working on the King's Watch series, and I said, if this isn't successful, I'll stop, because I'm spending all my time writing, and if nobody's going to read it, But thankfully, with the third book, because I wrote the first two King's Watch books together and published them together, so people would have something to follow on, and it did get some traction. And then during lockdown, it got a lot of traction.
That's good.
So that's why I carried on with that. So I point people back to the five books that came before it. Most people don't. Most people, they're not interested. They're fantasy readers, and they don't. If it hasn't got gnomes, dwarfs, the fae, dragons, or giant moles in it, they're not interested.
Okay. Well, shall we get on to a totally different kind of book that's not written by you, and then we might get back to another book written by you? Who knows?
Who knows?
Right. Bleak House by Charles Dickens. So,
there are umpteen thousands of different editions of this.
I think I've read Bleak House. I think so, a long time ago.
If you don't fancy reading it's 990 pages long, and it's pretty small print. If you don't fancy reading it, then you should definitely have a look at the BBC TV adaptation, which is, I think, Claire Foy's Breakout. show. She plays the young female lead in it. It's superbly well done. Considering it's such a long book, they covered most of it. Gillian Anderson plays Lady Deadlock. But I wanted to. The reason I chose Bleak House is not just to prove that I can read long books. Is I wanted to read the first couple of sentences. The first sentence consists of one word in capital letters.
Yeah.
London. The first sentence. London. Michaelmas term lately over, and the Lord Chancellor sitting in Lincoln's Inn Hall. Implacable November weather. As much mud in the streets as if the waters had but newly retired from the face of the earth. And it would not be wonderful to meet a megalosaurus 40 feet long or so, waddling like an elephantine lizard up Holborn Hill. Yeah, and it goes on to smoke and fog in particular. And it's the first 2 pages, you read them and you're blown away. And you may not notice if you're not looking. The first 2 pages none of the sentences have a main verb in them. Not one. Michaelmas term lately over, and the Lord Chancellor sitting in Lincoln's Inn Hall. There's no main verb there. That's just 2 bits, and it goes on. Fog here, fog there, fog blowing, and it's everything. Nothing is moving. Everything is static, like the court case at the heart of the book. Nothing can move forward because it's all locked in chancery. And the story in Bleak House is not the most important thing about it in some ways. It's the way he does it. This was written in 1852 and 1853. If any of your viewers aren't familiar with Dickens, he was a prodigious writer. He wrote more, I think, possibly any other British novelist. And journalism. He would write entire editions of a magazine as well as writing novels. Bleak House was published in serial installment, famously. And people would queue round the block to get the latest installment of Bleak House. Which is one of the reasons why it's so long. You can keep spinning it out. And it's given that's where it was coming from, what he does, he has the first few pages, no main verb in the sentence. And then he has half the book is told in the third person and half the book is told in the first person. And he never explains why. He never says why he switches from one to the other. We get to see Esther Summerson, who's the character played by Claire Foy, a young ward of court, a young girl who's been living in a protected environment, brought up in a tiny little school. They'd gone to a tiny little house and gone to a little school somewhere out in the country. And she's catapulted into London. And she is one of has a connection to this court case, Jarndyce and Jarndyce, which that particular court case has an entire life of its own outside the book. People refer to it as sort of Jarndyce type thing. And the book flows from there, and it's got absolutely everything in it. It's got Lord and Lady Deadlock. What a name! It's It's got the ultimate junk shop. It's got spontaneous human combustion in it. And in the TV series, it was Johnny Vegas who spontaneously combusted. It's got mysterious masked heroes working behind the scenes. It's got Joe the crossing sweeper, the poorest of the poor. It's got bricklayers. It's got a detective called Inspector Bucket. Now, it has got absolutely everything in it. It's got high drama. It's got. I borrowed one of the characters in it. The solicitor who works for Lady Deadlock is called Mr. Tulkinghorn. Nobody's ever named his characters better than Charles Dickens. No one ever. And in A Serpent in Paradise, Tom Morton, the detective, he used to be a solicitor, and he comes across a lawyer and he says this man's got talking horn syndrome. And his partner, who's a lass from Lancashire, his partner says, "You what? Is that a real disease? Is that what's happened wrong with his skin?" And Tom says, "No, it's what can happen to solicitors if they spend so long amongst their papers that they dry out, cease to be human." And I chose Bleak House because if a writer has ever needed an idea, you'll find one in there. You'll also find that whatever idea you thought was original, it's been done before.
Yeah. Everything, like, there's very little original, but you can spin the stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. As they used to say, it's the way you tell them.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to change the order of the books coming up so that we have another one of not. We finish off with one of your books because at the moment it's the other way around. So I'm going to be changing and talk about the Odyssey, so we can finish on one of your books.
Right.
So,
another small book.
I have read this. I have actually read that book a long time ago.
Yeah.
There's not the Iliad's the upper one, but the Iliad was incomprehensible. The Odyssey's he's readable, but it's long.
Very, very, very long. Yeah. And I did Latin when I was at school, and we had to study Latin poetry, and I've never studied ancient Greek. I know you can't get to do philosophy at university without picking up a fair few odd Greek terms, which are of no use whatsoever.
Yeah.
But I don't know anything about the actual way that ancient Greek comes over in verse, and why it's like it is. I mean, I can talk. I can give you a stab at explaining why Shakespeare's verse is like it is from the English language, but I've got no idea why Greek verse is like it is because I can't speak Greek. And it's the Odyssey is a poem. And it does. The one I'm holding up here is a translation by Robert Fagles, and you'll get people who say, "Oh, that's rubbish. Don't want to do that," because they're all translations. But it worked for me, and it is very much poetry. It's one of those things. Most people have heard of the Odyssey and Homer, even if there is now an entire generation who thinks he's a character in The Simpsons.
Well, he is a character in The Simpsons, but he's not the person who wrote this book. So it's like
blind Homer. Yes, a Greek poet. Was he, or was he a collection of poets that was gathered together? All of that sort of. Yeah, I want to focus on. This book was written in about 2,800 years ago, something like that. It was somebody who was probably an oral poet who learned, as part of an oral tradition, and had learnt from generations before, knew the Odysseus stories, and you can't recite the whole of the Odyssey in one go. It's it's loads of different stories, and the poets would, or whether on festivals or for earn their keep, poets would go and they'd recite some poetry, because people were sitting around and saying, can people not hurry up a bit and invent YouTube? And no, we're going to have to make do with some epic poetry until that comes along. And Homer's fellow poets would do bits of stories, and then somebody said, "Have you tried this new thing? The Phoenicians have been doing it. It's called writing. Try it." Instead of turning your goat skins into a winter coat, try scraping it down and writing on it. And it's one of the first books from a culture that we would recognize as being European. I mean, clearly, there were many books that had been written in many places around the world before that, but the Odyssey is one of, if not the first book in the Western European tradition. And some people don't like to admit that. Some people say, but since then, it has an enormous power. It has, you don't need to peel very deeply into almost any book that's been written since then to see find traces of the Odyssey. And I think it's great that people are sort of coming back to the Greek. Stephen Fry, of course, produced those retelling of Greek stories recently and narrated them. Ted Hughes, possibly the greatest English poet of the 20th century, translated them as well. I mean, he knew Greek, even though people look at him as a dour Yorkshireman. He could read Greek. And of course, there's also been a corrective where particularly women authors have been going and saying, hang on, what are the untold stories? You know, what was it like for the people who weren't heroes? And have been looking into that. Very simply, the Odyssey is about one of these soldiers from the Trojan War who, when they've won, it's trying to get home, but the gods are trying to stop him.
Yeah.
And I said that Odin is a figure in my books, very deliberately. He's a character in there, as we also get to meet the Morrigan. And we know, because she feels him. Mina, Conrad's girlfriend, is the lady from an Indian heritage. And Mina feels the presence of Ganesh. So the gods are there, just like they're in the Odyssey. And again, that was a deliberate decision. You know, sometimes in fantasy novels, they're off stage, that you don't know that they're there. Sometimes I've put them in and done my best to try and make it work. That's not up to me to say. But in the Odyssey, an awful lot goes on, and it is about one man's journey home. Fundamentally, and you can take that and reread it in so many different ways. It contains it contains possibly the archetypal description of the underworld, where Odysseus has to go and make a sacrifice, and in order to be able to carry on and get his journey home, he has to come to terms with the people who've gone before. And there's so many different ways you can see why in the early days of psychotherapy, people said, oh, you know, these myths and are all, you know, there. It's a book that has to be it has to be taken into account when you're looking at almost any book that's been written in the Western tradition since.
Well, I mean, coming back to the old setback, has to do something to fix setback. So another setback. It's the same. Odysseus' story is very similar to most fantasy books, really.
It is, I made a deliberate choice when I started writing the King's Watch stories that you would see that you could I was sort of almost upfront about it, that the parallels between Conrad Clark, my hero, and Odysseus. And Conrad, to get home, all he has to do is get in this helicopter. He has no shortage of favourable winds, unlike Odysseus, who's always in search of a favourable wind. But Conrad needs to, the home he needs to get back to is a moral one, because of the decisions he's made at the beginning of A Piece of Blue Sky. And to a certain extent, the 20-odd books I've written since are him trying to work through those decisions.
Okay, well, should we get off the Odyssey and onto the last book you recommended? So here we go. Three-Ring Circus.
There we go.
Hayden.
Yeah, as you can see,
same.
Very much part of the same thing. Three-Ring Circus came out a month ago.
Okay.
It's as you can see, my books have got thicker as well. Quite a bit. When I started, one of the ideas for the 13th Witch was that I would start a book series with number 13 in the title, and then the next one would have 12. Then we have 11th Hour, Tenfold, all the way down. When I finished writing Four Roads Cross, Conrad has come to a point where there's going to be a big event in his life. He's going to get married. And my readers have been talking about this, and it's clearly been building up to it. And you can't have a wedding as the main event in a book. You can have it at the end. You can't have a wedding as the main event in the middle of the book unless it's Jane Eyre and the wedding doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Or unless it's Game of Thrones and everybody dies.
Yeah.
Neither of which seemed particularly attractive for various reasons. So I wanted the wedding to be part of the ongoing journey in the King's Watch. Eventually, the last book will be 0 Hour when we get around to it. And all of the books have been mostly featured Conrad as a narrator. It's their first person, unlike the Operation Jigsaw books. Their first person. Conrad tells the story. Then I started to have other narrators coming in and taking some of the burden, including Tom Morton, who's the detective in the Operation Jigsaw books.
Oh, okay.
And then I thought, right, how am I going to make this work? And I decided that what could be one huge book about the size of Bleak House would actually be better if it was split in two. So that's why there are 2 threes. There's Three Ring Circus, and the book before it was Third Eye.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that fooled people.
Yeah, they were like, "Have we got the same book?" I suppose you could have written 2 books running in parallel, couldn't you? I mean,
that's what I did.
Okay.
Third Eye is told by Conrad, and it features the stag do and the wedding, and then he and his bride disappear.
Oh, okay.
Rumored possibly to be heading for Valhalla. And at the same time, as we're going through the build up to the wedding and the various politics that are going on, we also get to see what's happening at a rehab centre in Yorkshire. And Kathy, the cook at this rehab centre, gets involved with one of the patients, and my readers will pick up almost on the first page that she's there, that this particular person is something to do with magic.
Yeah.
So we've got stag do's, wedding, at the same time Kathy's story about what's going on with her and Donald Bell, the patient, and then wedding, and we jump to afterwards. That's Third Eye. But in Three Ring Circus, I said, right, I'm going to do something really different, and I decided to make the book 80% of the book is told by a non-human character.
Okay.
The Fae featured in they started to come in around halfway through the series. They become more prominent, and in Three Ring Circus, we get to follow the life cycle of one of the Fae from when she's hatched to when she drops her wings and takes up a mortal shape, and she then gets attached to the bridal party as a hairdresser.
Oh, okay.
So an immortal hairdresser. Who wouldn't want one of those?
Well, I suppose your hair's always done, isn't it? So
and her name is Alicia, and we get to see what's going on in with her and her princess that she works for, and the princess is there to help Mina prepare for the wedding, Mina being Conrad's fiance. And we get to see the hen do, and Alicia gets her own story. It's her own personal journey, her own personal Odyssey begins in the book and continues towards the end. And after Alicia's story is concluded, for good or ill, we don't know, unless you read the book, of course. Then you'll know. We go back to what happened to Conrad when he allegedly disappeared on his way to Valhalla. So to tie it all up together.
So people who read this and the other book, they will know what's coming in the next book then. Is that kind of...
Well, if you read Third Eye, you have got a huge number of unanswered questions, and I very carefully crafted it so that Third Eye works on its own. and you follow Kathy's story all the way to the end.
Yeah.
And you know that in Three Ring Circus, you know that the wedding takes place. You know that no one dies at the wedding, or do they? But someone disappears at the wedding. You don't know when you start Three Ring Circus what happens to Alicia.
Yeah.
And you don't know what happened when Conrad disappeared.
Okay, well, that's exciting for your long-term fans of the whole series.
That's just to, I chose that book just to anybody who's not, anybody who watches this that is not a fan of the King's Watch already, that it is a very much a live series, and that it is going on. And also available in audiobook.
Okay, well, that's good.
Yeah, all of them. They've been recorded by, I've contracted with a company called Audio Factory, who have got two amazing narrators who really do. When I listen to the proofs, because I started about 5 books after I started getting them narrated and have been catching up. And I listen to the proofs when they've recorded them, and I think, did I write that?
Okay, well, that finishes the books, but I have 2 questions I ask everybody. The first question, we haven't got that many books to talk about, but I ask people, what would be your flow chart for working out, if you had to give somebody one of these books, what decisions tree would it be to work out what book to give them? Or is there one book of this list you would just give them anyway?
Oh, you mean sort of like
I mean, because I used to ask everybody which book would be your number 1 in this list, but then people were like, well, it depends. So now I ask,
well,
it's the flow chart in decision making in your mind to choose which one of these books to recommend.
Well, I would say I would start with if I'm going to forget about my own books, because I never recommend myself to people.
No, there's something about authors you just don't do that, is it? So,
I've described them, and if they're your cup of tea, I hope you enjoy them. If you wanted a recommendation, I would say, because they're all different genres. My decision tree would be, do you read fantasy? Oh, you do? Oh, right. Have you heard of Roger Zelazny? Oh, well, you really must try Lord of Light. Oh, do you like crime books? Oh, you've got to, and you haven't read P.D.James. Oh, you're in for a real treat then. And I would never recommend that anybody reads Bleak House. I've just put it up there to say what's there. It's a bit like saying I wouldn't recommend people try and climb Mount Everest. But I'm just describing what it's like. Reading Bleak House or reading the Odyssey are a little bit like Ezra Pound, possibly a very controversial poet, but he did once say that he was a great champion that books should be taken on their own terms. And he said, if you're going to read a detective story, it should be good detective story. And P.D.James writes very good detective stories. But he also said, the experienced mountaineer may prefer Derbyshire to Switzerland, but he will not pretend that High Peak is taller than Mont Blanc. And I wouldn't pretend that Lord of Light is as great a book as the Odyssey. But I dip into it every now and then. I reread this on a regular basis. I dip into Bleak House occasionally. But I reread Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy roughly once a decade. And I've watched the TV series several times as well.
Well, I mean, there might be budding mountaineer readers who are like, well, I'll just finish War and Peace, and I'm looking for something like that. It's like, Bleak House or the Odyssey.
Well, I would say that Bleak House is a much better book than War and Peace. I think Tolstoy got carried away.
A few times, so but I've always been put off by the length of reading it. So. And my other question, you kind of already answered, but I'll ask you: what books are you writing next, and what sort of timescale have people got in terms of when you might finish the series? And have you got any plans beyond the series? Are you going to take him into space next? Something like that?
The readers who I engage with in my Facebook group have been asking for some time what happens after we get to 0.
Yeah.
And I haven't answered that question.
Oh, yeah, right. You're
Mainly
playing
I have no idea.
Yeah.
As to, funnily enough, I haven't actually answered what I'm doing next, because at the moment I'm helping. There's a book I haven't mentioned by my sister, Ruth Ward. She wrote a book called Murder with Intent, which is a cozy crime novel.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It was I took a leaf out of Charles Dickens, and I published that as an charity advent calendar in 25 installments. So if you subscribed to it, you got one episode a day delivered during Advent, and the killer was revealed on Christmas Day. Anyway, that got enough positive feedback for me to go and help my sister write the next 2.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
so you're now doing cozy. There's all sorts of weird crime. Like, when I got more into the publishing world, it's like things like cat detective books and things. There's all sorts of weird. Like, I met somebody who was a shapeshifter romance author. I'm like, I didn't even know these categories existed. So, and like, cozy's kind of a bit more traditional, I think. So.
Yeah, when I'm in author groups and I see people refer to things like dark vampire lesbian reverse harem.
Yeah.
And I think
well,
I think I may not be the target audience for that.
It's not lesbian fiction, it's sapphic fiction, because lesbian has more, like, because of the trans thing, like sapphic includes people who change gender as well. So that's the new thing.
Okay. Right. Yeah.
We have a few comments that I don't understand in the thing. Somebody called Helen.
I've been looking to see whether the comments would come up on mine, or do I need to sign in?
Unfortunately, it's on my phone.
Oh, okay.
We had somebody earlier say, Jafar said, your books are incredible and blah, blah, blah. Nice things about, presumably he's talking about your books. Helen Rennick said, -1, pretty please. I suspect she may be asking you to write a -1 book.
Yeah, Helen Rennick is a very dedicated reader. She's yeah, she's riding high in the Golden Worm charts.
Oh, it's a golden.
Yeah, if you're in the Merlin's Tower regulars, you can get awarded Golden Worms for entering some of the bonkers competitions that I run.
Okay.
Yeah. So Helen Rennick is a stalwart of the irregulars.
And there's somebody called Wolfgang. I think he waves. I'm not sure if, like, or I'm saying it's a he, could be she, or well, it could be anything nowadays. So yes. So we had some comments, more than normal. And I actually had to put need to tap to unmute, which is a weird feature of Amazon Line. Wolfgang says he is a she. Okay, sorry. So my apology.
Well, can I say, Wolfgang, thank you very much for the lovely reviews you've left on Amazon. Very generous. Thank you.
Yeah, well, your whole community and all. So anyway, I am going to close the show down. Thanks to all the people watching on Amazon, and some people might watch on my LinkedIn. I have no idea. I always seem to find all the likes and comments after the show, so that's another great thing. And this show will go on to YouTube afterwards, and also onto podcast. I've got a podcast version of it, so if anybody wants to relive the excitement of listening to the show in audio film, they can do that. So, or if you
still haven't asked me why the picture of Mount Fuji.
Oh yeah, no, I haven't, have I? Well, maybe I won't. Maybe I won't ask about a picture.
Maybe it can remain a mystery.
Yes. Well, you have to read in book -2. You will say, why have you got a picture of Mount Fuji? So, okay, why have you got a picture? Why did you send me a picture of you in front of Mount Fuji?
Because because the official author photographs are 12 years old, and I don't look like that anymore. So I was looking for a recent picture of me, and there's a picture of me with a prospect of Mount Fuji. And if any of your readers or listeners have a bucket list and going to view Mount Fuji's on the bucket list, I have a piece of advice for them.
Yeah.
Go in January.
Ooh.
For the other 11 months of the year, you can't see the bloody thing.
Oh yeah, I've heard like a lot of people say that it's like they say, "Oh, we get a great." Oh, it's clouds.
Yeah, I mean, literally. I mean, the Japanese guides all say, "Sorry, we're going to show you some amazing things, but not Mount Fuji."
Yeah. So why is it only January then? Sorry.
Because it's very, very. It's right next to the coast.
Yeah.
It's very high, and it's covered in cloud all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Japan's an island, so there's a lot. Like Britain, Britain's covered in cloud most of the time. So is Mount Fuji.
Yeah.
But in January, the weather clears, and you can see it from the beach. When you go on a tour, they take you to the Mount Fuji Visitor Center, and they've got that incredible picture of Mount Fuji, and they take pictures of you standing in front of it.
Oh.
So that picture of me I sent you is me in the Mount Fuji Visitor Center.
Yeah. Well, so on my last show, with who was it with? Well, somebody. We ended up talking about Venice for large chunks of the show. So now we've talked about Japan and Mount Fuji. So that's good. The show is now in peace. And we've had some travel advice. And well, I've at least got some people booked in for the next 4 weeks, which makes a change for this show. Because normally it's like, somebody dropped out. So, but yeah, there should be a show next week. So anybody wants to tune in and listen to whoever it is next week, then that'd be wonderful. So thanks so much for coming on the show, Mark. And
well, thank you very much for having me.
Yes.
It's. I hope people found it entertaining.
Yes, me too. And thanks to the people watching.